The great hall of Lurea shimmered with lights and floating crystals. Aliens of all shapes and colors sat in golden rows, wearing long robes and shining jewelry. They whispered to each other with excitement. The grand music ceremony was about to begin. At the center of the stage stood the sacred Xenotone, an ancient instrument no human had ever touched. It was made of silver vines and glowing blue threads, humming softly like a sleeping star. Only the most skilled Lurian musicians were allowed to play it. They believed it held the spirit of their ancestors. Jonah Ray stood quietly at the back of the hall. He was the only human in the crowd, wearing simple clothes and carrying a small bag. He had come alone, far from Earth, just to hear the famous sounds of the Xenotone. But something deep in his chest pulled him forward, like a soft, invisible hand. The moment the ceremony started, Jonah's eyes locked on the instrument. It was calling to him, in a way no one else seemed to feel. A tall announcer stepped forward, lifting his forearms. "Welcome to the grand harmony of Lurea," he said with a proud voice. "The Xenotone will speak once more through the hands of our greatest master." The crowd cheered loudly, clapping and waving glowing sticks. As the maestro stepped forward, Jonah's heart pounded. But then, something strange happened. The Xenotone went silent. It refused to sing even when the maestro touched its strings. Gasps spread through the hall. The maestro tried again, frowning, but nothing happened. The sacred sound was missing, and no one could understand why. Whispers turned to confusion and confusion to fear. The announcer stepped forward again. "It seems the Xenotone must rest," he said quickly. "We will continue with other instruments tonight." Jonah didn't know why he moved, but his feet walked toward the stage, step by step, heartbeat by heartbeat, until he stood near the Xenotone. The guard shouted, "Stop, human, step back." But it was too late. Jonah's fingers reached out and touched the strings. Laughter exploded through the crowd. "Look, the human thinks he can play the sacred Xenotone," someone yelled. Another alien shouted, "What a joke, his kind doesn't even understand true music." Some covered their mouths, some pointed, others just laughed openly. Jonah felt heat rise to his face, but he didn't stop. He gently placed both hands on the instrument and took a deep breath. The first sound was wrong, sharp, and broken. More laughter followed, louder, crueler. But Jonah closed his eyes and remembered something. A tiny old piano in a dusty room, his mother, coughing from sickness, playing a soft melody as she smiled. "Music is not always perfect, Jonah," she used to say. "Sometimes the broken notes show the truest feelings." Jonah tried again, this time slower. The strings responded, softer now, like a whisper through space. The crowd went silent. The laughter stopped as a deep, strange hum filled the air. The Xenotone glowed under his fingers, its blue light turning gold. A soft wind blew through the hall, though there were no windows or doors open. People sat straighter, eyes wide, mouths closed. Jonah's hands moved without thinking, guided by something old and deep. The melody was simple, almost like a lullaby, but it carried a sadness that wrapped around every listener. A Lurian child began to cry, tears rolling down her pale cheeks. Her mother reached out to hold her, not understanding why they both were crying. An elder dropped his staff and placed a hand over his heart. Jonah played on, his own eyes wet. He didn't know what he was doing, only that it felt right. The eye. Xenotone pulsed with him, matching his breath and heartbeat. Every note was a piece of his past, his pain, his love, and his hope. The hall was completely silent now, except for the song. Even the guard stood still, no longer moving toward him. The final note faded into the glowing crystals above. Jonah opened his eyes slowly. No one laughed anymore. No one said a word. They all stared at him, not as a fool, not as a human, but as someone who had touched something they had all forgotten. The Xenotone was still glowing, resting quietly. Under his hands it had spoken, not through the maestro, not through tradition, but through a simple man from Earth, and the galaxy had listened. The silence after Jonah's song felt longer than the music itself. Every alien in the hall sat frozen, as if their hearts had forgotten how to beat. The glow of the Xenotone slowly dimmed under Jonah's fingers. It was as if the instrument had fallen asleep after sharing its deepest memory. Jonah stepped back, unsure of what he had done. He didn't understand the language of the Lurians, but he understood their eyes now. They were not angry anymore. They were afraid. Suddenly, the Grand Maestro stood up, robes sweeping behind him. His voice shook as he spoke. The Xenotone has chosen him. Gasps and shouts filled the hall, louder than any applause. The human? A low-born outsider? Someone shouted, It's impossible! Another cried, Blasphemy! Came a voice from the noble row. But none of them dared to approach the stage. Jonah looked around, his heart thudding hard in his chest. He felt small under their gazes, like he had broken a rule he didn't know existed. But even as the fear grew, something strange happened. A soft hum returned to the Xenotone, and a golden thread of light stretched out, touching Jonah's shoulder. A voice deep and ancient whispered in his mind, You have unlocked what others forgot. Then, the light faded. Jonah stumbled back as two guards finally moved. Grabbing his arms, he didn't fight. But he didn't feel scared either. Inside him, the music still echoed, soft and full of memory. As they dragged him through the side door, he heard someone cry, not in anger, but in sorrow. He turned his head and saw the Lurian child from before, tears still falling. She placed her hand on her chest, just like he had seen humans do on Earth. Jonah smiled weakly, then vanished behind the great curtains. He was taken to a quiet chamber lit by blue candles. The guards stood outside while a single alien walked in. She was smaller than the others, with smooth silver skin and eyes like dark water. She wore no crown or armor, only a long, soft robe with symbols stitched in silver thread. I am Zelari, she said in slow, careful English. You are not what they expected. Jonah sat on a bench, rubbing his wrist. I didn't mean to upset anyone. You didn't upset them, she replied, sitting across from him. You scared them. He blinked. Why? It was just a song. No, Zelari said softly. It was a memory. Jonah looked confused, and she explained. The Xenotone is not just an instrument, she said. It was made from the remains of a dying star, and it holds the emotions of those who play. For generations, we Lurians have tried to control it, to play perfect music for power and pride. But you played with feeling, not skill. Jonah didn't know what to say. He had never trained in music, never studied notes. He just remembered the sound of his mother's hands on old piano keys. And the way her music made the silence less lonely. Zelari stood up and walked over to a glowing wall panel, pressing her fingers against it. A soft image appeared, showing the crowd in the grand hall. Many of them were still sitting, not talking, just staring at the stage. It's been 900 years since the Xenotone responded like that, Zelari whispered. It remembers pain, and it speaks only when it finds a soul worthy of holding that pain. Jonah frowned, but I'm not special. You are, she said simply, because you are broken, like all of us. He didn't reply, but her words stayed in his chest like a second heartbeat. Zelari sat again, her voice calm but serious. The High Maestro wants you silenced, she said. He sees you as a threat. Why? Jonah asked. Because your song made people feel what they've buried for centuries. Before Jonah could answer, the chamber door opened again. Another Lurian stepped in, a member of the Galactic Council dressed in green and gold. He didn't smile, but he didn't look angry either. You are to be brought before the council, he said. They will decide your fate. Jonah stood slowly, still dazed. Will they listen? He asked. The counselor hesitated, then looked at Zelari. They must. As Jonah walked out of the chamber, the song he had played still whispered in his ears, but this time it was joined by something new, a deeper sound, distant and ancient, like another melody was waiting to be played. A song not just from Earth, but from the hearts of all who had forgotten how to cry. The Galactic Council Hall floated above the city of Lurea like a giant silver flower. It spun slowly in the sky, surrounded by glowing rings of light. Jonah stood at the edge of a wide bridge, looking up at the giant structure. His hands were still shaking, but his mind was calm. The memory of the Xenotone's voice whispered inside him. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew it was real. Solari stood beside him, silent and watchful. She had chosen to walk with him, even though it made her a target. "Why are you helping me?" Jonah asked quietly. She didn't answer right away, then she said, "Because when I heard your song, I remembered my sister." Jonah looked at her surprised. "She was taken in the last war," Solari whispered. "Until your song, I had forgotten the sound of her voice." They stepped onto a glass platform that rose into the sky. The city below shrank smaller and smaller, until it looked like a field of stars. Inside the council hall, they were greeted by more guards and more stairs. Tall alien leaders in colorful robes stood behind long floating tables. Their eyes were hard, their voices colder. One of them spoke. "Human Jonah Ray, you are here to explain your crime." Jonah stepped forward slowly. "I didn't mean to cause harm." "You touched the sacred Xenotone," another snapped. "A thing forbidden to outsiders." "He didn't just touch it," an older voice interrupted. "He woke it." Heads turned as a silver-skinned elder walked forward, her eyes deep and heavy with time. Her name was Ilarin, the last surviving member of the council who had once heard the Xenotone truly sing. "He played no song of conquest," Ilarin said. "He played truth." Some murmured, some frowned. One council member stood angrily. "He is not one of us. He is human." "And still," Ilarin replied. The Xenotone answered him. They asked Jonah many questions: where he learned music, what his people believed about emotion, why he dared to play before thousands. Jonah answered honestly, with simple words. "My mother taught me music, not with rules, but with love," he said. "She said a broken heart still sings." The room grew quiet, but the tension remained. Then one of the council members asked, "Do you know what the Xenotone really is?" Jonah shook his head. So they told him. Long ago, before the Great Alliances, the Lurians were a peaceful race of dreamers. They had built the Xenotone to carry the feelings of their people, to store memories in sound. But after a terrible war that broke their hearts, the instrument went silent. They tried to use it again, but only got empty, hollow music. So the council turned it into a symbol, not a voice. And for centuries, it became a tool of power, not feeling. Jonah's music had awakened its soul. The instrument remembered what it once was, and that frightened those who built their rule on silence. A heavy silence followed the story. Then the high maestro stepped forward, robes gleaming like fire. He stared at Jonah with cold eyes. "You are dangerous," he said slowly. "You make people remember what should be forgotten." Jonah stood tall, but his voice was soft. "I didn't come to break anything," he said. "I came to listen." The high maestro turned to the council. "I say he must be silenced, banished or caged before his music spreads." Some nodded in agreement, but then a soft sound filled the room, a quiet hum, low and trembling. It came from behind the council tables. Everyone turned and saw a young council assistant, a simple alien girl, standing with tears in her eyes. She was humming Jonah's melody, the one from the concert. Her voice cracked, but she kept singing. And slowly others joined, one by one. Guards, scribes, even a few council members hummed the tune, not for performance, not for law, but because it touched something deep. The high maestro shouted, "Enough!" But the sound grew louder. Jonah stood frozen. This was no longer his song. It belonged to everyone now. Solari whispered, "You've started something they cannot stop." Ilarin stepped forward again. "Let the human go," she said. "Let him play, or silence the whole galaxy." The council did not speak. But no one ordered Jonah's arrest. He was free for now. But they warned him. If he played again, it would be at his own risk. "Then I'll take that risk," Jonah replied. He and Solari walked out of the hall in silence. But above them, the lights of the city shimmered a little brighter, as if the stars themselves had heard the song too. The next few days passed like a dream Jonah could not escape. News of the human who played the Xenotone spread across the galaxy. Some called him a prophet, others called him a mistake. The council made no official decision. They said they needed more time, but Jonah knew what that meant. They were afraid to punish him, and too proud to praise him. So Jonah left Luria quietly. He boarded an old cargo ship with rusted walls and dusty seats. Zalari went with him without asking for permission. "I've lived in silence too long," she said. "Your song reminded me I still feel." Their first stop was the moon of Velra. It was a quiet place where forgotten miners lived. Far from the cities, Jonah was afraid to play again. He sat with his hands in his lap, staring at the small travel guitar he had brought with him. "It's not the Xenotone," he said. "It's nothing special." Zalari smiled gently. "It's not the instrument," she said. "It's you." So Jonah played under a metal roof while old miners listened. They didn't clap, they didn't cheer, but when the song ended, a grizzled man with one eye stood up. "My wife sang that melody to our daughter before she died," he said. "I had forgotten her voice." Until now, word spread, and the next day more came to listen. Alien children sat cross-legged, their parents behind them. Jonah sang in English, but the feelings crossed all language. He didn't sing about planets or stars. He sang about loss, love, memory, and hope. And the listeners cried, not because they were sad, but because the music helped them feel alive again. Zalari began to keep a record. She wrote down the stories people shared after the songs. A lonely boy who had never seen his father. A war veteran who never cried until Jonah's notes cracked him open. An old woman who danced again after years of silence, but not everyone was happy. In the dark corners of space, the High Maestro watched. His network of ears sent him every whisper, every crowd that gathered. "He's spreading chaos," the Maestro hissed. Turning pain into power, he sent shadow agents to follow Jonah's steps, not to arrest him, but to make him disappear quietly. Jonah didn't know he was being followed. He only knew that with each song, something inside him grew heavier. Memories of Earth came back sharper. His mother's last days, the empty apartment, the hunger, the cold. But also the way she smiled when she played, how she said, "Every broken thing can still shine, one night, on a space station orbiting a dead world." Jonah sat alone. He had played 3 songs that day, and now the guitar rested on his lap. His fingers ached, his voice was dry, but the ache in his heart was stronger. Zalari sat beside him in silence, holding a small memory crystal. She placed it in his hand. "It's my sister's last message," she said softly. She was only 16. Jonah nodded and began to play. A soft tune, fragile as glass, slow like falling snow. It carried the weight of goodbye, of a voice that would never be heard again. Zalari closed her eyes, tears sliding down her silver cheeks. That night, someone tried to kill Jonah. A shadow moved through the vents of the station, a needle coated in poison aimed at his heart. But Zalari was faster. She sensed the danger. The assassin escaped, but not before whispering, "Stop playing, or next time we won't miss." Jonah sat in silence afterward, his hands shaking again. "I don't want to die," he said quietly, "but I don't want to stop either." Zalari touched his shoulder. "Then don't," she said. "If they want to silence your voice, let your song grow louder." The next day, Jonah walked into the central hall of the station. He placed his guitar on a crate and looked at the crowd. "I was told to stop," he said, "but I won't." Then he played, not soft this time, but bold, strong, full of fire. It was not a song of sadness, but of defiance. It shouted that emotions were not weakness, that remembering was strength. Child in the front row stood up and sang with him. Then another voice joined, and another, until the station shook with harmony. Some cried, some laughed, some simply stood still with hands over hearts. Far away, the council listened to the reports. The High Maestro slammed his fist. "He's becoming dangerous." But Alarin only smiled. "No," she said. "He's becoming necessary." Jonah stood at the edge of a quiet village carved into the cliffs of Myrath. The sky above was green and gold, filled with floating stone islands and silent birds. Below him, dozens of small alien homes blinked with soft lights. These people had not heard music in generations, not since the day of Ash. Their history was full of silence. So Jonah came not to perform, but to listen. Solari walked beside him, her hands holding a small recording orb. She could feel the sadness in the air thick like fog. Children peeked from windows but ran when Jonah smiled. Adults nodded stiffly but offered no words. Jonah sat on a stone near the center of the village and gently placed his guitar on his lap. He didn't start playing. He simply closed his eyes and waited. Soon an elder approached him, a woman with cracked skin and hollow eyes. She sat across from him and placed a clay bowl on the ground. "This village," she said, "was once full of song." Her voice trembled as she told the story. A firestorm had wiped out half their people. The survivors built new homes but never sang again. "The last song we heard," she said, "was the scream of the wind taking our loved ones." Jonah nodded, understanding that pain without words. He touched the strings gently, not to impress, but to honor. A single note echoed through the cliff walls. Soft and trembling, the villagers looked up slowly, some stepping out from their homes. His song was not fast or beautiful. It was broken, slow, like walking through ashes barefoot. Every string told of something lost, of mothers, brothers, dreams, homes. Solari watched silently as the villagers began to gather. A child sat beside Jonah without a word. An old man placed a candle at his feet, and someone began to hum, unsure and shy. But it grew louder, braver. Jonah's music had no lyrics, but its message was clear. We remember, even through the pain. When the last note faded, the village did not clap. They bowed their heads not to Jonah, but to the memory his music awakened. The elder woman touched his shoulder and whispered, "You gave us permission to grieve again." That night, fires burned in every home, not for cooking, but for warmth. Stories were told for the first time. In years, children laughed, and one even sang a short rhyme. Jonah smiled as he sat near the fire. "I didn't heal them," he said to Solari. "They were already healing. They just needed a sound to follow." The next morning, Jonah found a hand-carved flute on his sleeping mat, a gift from the villagers made from old wood once used for graves. It was their way of saying, "You are one of us now." But peace didn't last. In the shadows of the next city, posters were spread, Jonah's face marked with the words, "Warning, Galactic Disturbance." The High Maestro had placed a bounty on Jonah's head, not to kill him, but to silence him forever. Already bounty hunters were being hired from the darker corners of the galaxy. Their mission: stop the songs before they spread too far. On the rocky world of Draven, a group of warriors gathered. One of them, a cold-eyed alien named Krax, studied Jonah's image. "He plays feelings," Krax said. "We fight with steel. He fights with sound. Then we silence the sound," another hissed. But while enemies grew in secret, so did Jonah's reach. A small ship carried him and Solari to a floating city called Zephyr's Hold. There, in the middle of a plaza full of statues and light fountains, Jonah played again. He didn't ask for permission. He simply played, and the people came. This time. His song told the story of a child waiting at a window for a father who never returned. The strings trembled like footsteps that never arrived, and the final note faded like breath on glass. A soldier in the crowd dropped his weapon and walked away. A mother kissed her sleeping daughter with tears in her eyes, and an old man whispered, "He sang my life." After the concert, Jonah sat quietly with Solari under a glowing tree. "I'm not trying to start a movement," he said. "I just can't keep it in anymore." Solari nodded. "That's exactly why it's becoming one." Back on Lurea, Council Elder Alarin stood at her balcony, watching the stars. A small speaker beside her played a soft recording of Jonah's latest melody. She let it finish before turning to her assistant. "Prepare the chamber," she said. "We must speak with him before the Maestro acts alone." Rain fell gently on the ruins of Velarin. It was a dead planet, left behind after centuries of war. The cities were broken, the skies cracked with lightning that never made a sound. No one lived here anymore. No one, except the ghosts of memory. And now, Jonah Ray. He stood on a cracked stone platform in the center of what used to be a concert hall. There was no roof, only the stars above. The floor was wet and cold, but he placed his chair there anyway. Beside him, Solari adjusted a small transmitter, her fingers steady. "This will send your music across every open frequency in the outer systems," she said. Jonah nodded, silent. They had chosen this place for one reason. No one controlled it. No council, no empire, no maestro. Just ruins and silence. Word had spread faster than the stars could blink. Aliens from across the galaxy arrived quietly, on small ships, on cargo freighters, even on foot. They brought no weapons, no banners, only hearts full of pain. They came from worlds where songs were banned, where emotions were weakness, and they came to hear a human who sang with broken hands and a tired voice. By the time Jonah sat down to play, thousands surrounded him. Many wore hoods, afraid of being seen. Some carried children, others carried the weight of years. No one spoke, not even Solari. She only gave him a look, gentle and full of trust. Jonah took a deep breath. His fingers touched the strings of his guitar, worn and cracked from travel, and he began to play. The first note was soft, barely heard, but it carried through the air like a whisper to every heart. The melody was slow and deep, filled with aching sorrow. It was the sound of someone who had lost too much but still dared to hope. People stood still, their eyes wide, their hands tight. Some trembled, others closed their eyes as the music grew. So did the silence. No one moved, as if afraid the sound would vanish. Jonah didn't sing in any known language. He let the strings speak, and they told a story of war, love, goodbye. He played the pain of losing a child, the silence after a goodbye that never came. He played the loneliness of space and the soft comfort of a memory that refuses to fade. A single tear fell from Solari's cheek, then another from a child in the crowd, then hundreds, then thousands. It was not just music, it was a release. The pain people buried deep inside, the grief they were never allowed to show. It all came pouring out. Through Jonah's song, they remembered how to cry again. A soldier fell to his knees and whispered the name of his brother. A mother clutched her daughter and finally said, "I'm sorry." Two strangers hugged, their faces wet. Even the bounty hunter, Krax, who had been sent to kill Jonah, stood frozen in the crowd. He dropped his weapon and wept. For the first time since his own planet burned, he let himself feel. The rain kept falling, but no one noticed anymore. Jonah's hands ached. His voice cracked as he finally spoke. "This song is not mine," he said softly. "It belongs to all of you." The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't shout or sing. They just stood quietly, letting the last note echo inside them, until there was only the sound of tears falling on stone far. Above, hidden in orbit, the High Maestro watched through a private feed. His face was tight, full of rage. "He's broken everything," he growled. One of his assistants whispered, "No, he's mending it." Back on the surface, Solari stepped onto the platform and helped Jonah up. "You did it," she said, her voice shaking. "No," Jonah whispered. "We did." At that moment, every screen across the outer systems lit up. Footage of the concert spread like fire through the stars. Leaders panicked, rulers trembled, but the people remembered across colonies and hidden worlds. Instruments long forgotten were taken out again. Songs that had been locked away were sung once more. Music schools reopened, not to teach control, but to teach feeling. Jonah didn't ask for thanks. He didn't ask for fame, he only wanted people to feel again, and tonight they did. Velarin, the dead world, was no longer silent. The next sunrise over Velarin was unlike any in its broken history. The planet, once lifeless and full of silence, now pulsed with energy, not from machines or weapons, but from hearts that had been opened, shaken, and finally healed. Jonah Ray sat beneath a crumbled statue, his guitar resting beside him. His fingers were blistered, his eyes tired, but his soul felt light. He had not saved the galaxy. He had reminded it how to feel. Solari stood nearby, watching ships lift off quietly into the dawn sky. One by one, those who had come to hear him were leaving, but they were not the same. They returned to their worlds carrying something powerful. A melody, a memory, a spark. Across the stars the wave began, on Kadran, a city once ruled by silence. Children sang in the streets for the first time in decades. On Grelos, a prison warden unlocked an old storage room and found a dusty harp. He began to play again. On the icy planet Runo, a girl who had never seen flowers carved them from ice. While humming Jonah's tune, these small things became movement. The people were no longer afraid of feeling. Back on Larea, the Galactic Council met in emergency session. The hall was tense, voices loud and divided. Some demanded Jonah's arrest, others argued for protection. The High Maestro stood in the center, trembling with rage. "He is undoing everything," he hissed. "He makes the strong weak, the silent loud, the obedient brave." But Council Elder Alarin stood calmly, her voice soft but sharp. "He makes them human," she said, "even those who are not." The vote was close, but clear. The Council would not stop Jonah. They would not protect him either. He would walk free, but on his own, the galaxy would choose what to do with him. Jonah didn't need their protection. He had never asked for it. He and Zilari traveled from system to system without security. They went to villages, outposts, crumbling cities where no diplomat had stepped in years. He didn't play for power. He played for pain. He played for healing. He played for those who thought they were alone. One day, he found himself on Earth. Again it had changed. Faster ships, taller towers, quieter people. But when he sat in a small park and began to play, an old woman stopped to listen. Then a teenager, then a tired father with his daughter. Soon, the bench was surrounded. He played the same song that began everything. And just like on Velarin, there were no cheers, only tears. Beautiful, silent tears. Zilari watched from a distance, arms crossed, a smile hidden on her lips. She had seen it all, from the first laugh in the concert hall to the last sob under the broken sky. "He doesn't need a crown," she whispered. "His music is his legacy." But not everyone was done fighting. The High Maestro, now stripped of most of his power, had vanished. Rumors said he was gathering those who feared the change Jonah had started. But Jonah did not hide. He kept playing, knowing that truth always brings enemies. On the world of Nelros, a school was opened, not to train perfect musicians, but to teach how to play from the heart. It was named the Ray Conservatory. Alien children of all species sat together, some with instruments, made of bone, others with strings of light. They were taught one lesson above all. Play what you feel. Zilari became the first teacher. Jonah visited only sometimes. He preferred to wander, to sit quietly with strangers and turn their silence into sound. He never grew rich. He never led armies. But his music reached deeper than any speech, deeper than any flag. It became part of the stars, and when one day he grew too tired to play, he passed his guitar to a girl with 3 eyes and small hands. She played a song for him. It was clumsy, simple, but full of truth. Jonah smiled and closed his eyes. The galaxy did not forget him. For in every station, in every broken world, in every quiet heart, there was still music, there was still feeling. And sometimes, when the stars aligned just right, you could hear it. A soft melody in the wind, a gentle hum from the soil, the echo of a man who touched the Xenotone and made the galaxy weep.